Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Megan Milan. Thanks for being here today. Well, by the end of this session, I'd like you all to be armed with some great tricks of the trade to manage your projects with transparency, efficiency, and scalability. This is a startup session, and I think that these tools will help you in any startup or any growing business. This is especially important when you're working with technical and business stakeholders. All these tips will help you improve your communication. You can save money because you're saving time if you're using these ideas. So, who am I? Why do I have any say-so in the above? I've spent over a decade traveling around different parts of startup organizations and have gleaned some great insights into what matters most for different parts of the org. I've worked in engineering, in sales, in marketing, in business operations. And I love to travel around the world on the side. So I consider myself both a world and org chart traveler. It's been really helpful to understand why it matters or what matters to each department. And that's really informed my career in project management. So I'll share some of these insights and how they specifically relate to Jira, but I just want you to know you can use any tool you'd like, and the same principles apply. Some people like Asana or Monday.com or Rike, or even just a basic spreadsheet to track what you're working on. You can really use anything. I'll be sharing overall principles to use while managing a project in any software. Definitely open to chatting further after the session. So jot down any questions you have along the way, and we'll catch up after. So let's get into it. Before you even start your project, it can feel like you have this big mountain, this big hill to climb. The beginning of a project seems really daunting to me sometimes. And I just want to race to get things off of that to-do list so that I'm closer to the end. But before you pass go, before you collect $200, just pause and take a second to assess what you have ahead of you. Answer a few key questions to set your project up for success, and this will really make all the difference in working with your team. You can have living and breathing documents that change over time, but just put a stake in the ground. And I know it seems like hitting the road and going fast is the best path forward. You might have a lot of pressure from your external stakeholders. Everyone's looking for results fast. I totally get it. Take an afternoon, outline what you have to do, what the dependencies you should be aware of, and it'll save you time in the long run. Work on a project charter. That's kind of the first place to start. Make sure you know what you're working on and everyone else is aligned to that. If different people have different ideas for the project, then do not pass go. You all have to align before you start working on different things or pulling different levers to make the project go. Once you have stakeholder agreement, you can think through what other teams you'll need to call on. I promise you'll be dependent on other teams. A product launch is dependent on so many teams. Engineering needs to deliver the actual work. Marketing needs to get the word out. Sales needs to sell it. Support needs to support it. It's everything. Most everything is a cross-functional project. So jot down the teams that you're going to need to call on and which sponsors from those teams you're going to need to work with. Another thing to think on is roles and responsibilities. Outline what people are working on and what they're responsible for in the project. That will help you from stepping on each other's toes. You could have a RACI or a rapid chart at the very, very basic level. Just make sure you have that project charter and kind of a roster of who's working on what. And it'll help you communicate the project to other teams too. You can say, hey, I'm working with Megan on this, so some of her time will be allocated to it. Be transparent. We're all in this together. So you have all these documents outlined. You spend your afternoon getting organized. Now, the one really important thing is to make sure you're transparent. We're all in this together. So there's no need to have notes to keep to yourself. Keep everything in a shared drive if you use Google Drive, or put them in a Confluence page if you use the Atlassian suite. If you use Teams, put them somewhere in Teams that everybody can find it. Make sure people can refer back to these documents again and again. And I know it seems like administrative work, and maybe I can totally see how some project managers might think that's not what they're meant to be doing, but just help your team out and it'll go a long way. You don't want people to have to click around for information. Make it super easy on them. So all of these items, once you have everything together, you're kind of level set with your team. And the next thing you need to do is you need to make sure you're speaking the same language as you're working on the project. So the age-old question that everybody comes to is, how do I set up my project? Should I use Scrum or Kanban? Which way do I turn? Have this text on the screen here. I don't have specific screenshots because I didn't want to give away any proprietary information, but you all may have seen a Scrum or a Kanban board. A Scrum board, you work in sprints, and Kanban, you kind of just have a big to-do list. There's advantages to each of these. There's kind of no wrong answer, but there's certain projects that Scrum works really well for. Things like software development, where you're kind of learning along the way. Maybe you have big milestones that you want to reach, but you aren't sure exactly how you're going to get there. Another thing with Scrum, your work is prioritized, and you have this prioritized backlog, and you hand the work to developers or people in the project in broken down chunks. There's planning involved here. You're planning, okay, what are we going to work on this sprint? And some people do 2-week sprints. You can do 3-week sprints or month-long sprints. Just make it the shortest amount of time that you can give some deliverable to your team. 2 weeks seems to be a sweet spot for us right now. 1 week, we were doing that for a while, but it wasn't enough time to really complete a task. So work just kept going into the next sprint. So we landed on 2-week sprints. If you're using Jira, you get great reporting out of the box with a Scrum board. And you don't have to do too much to get a burn down chart. It's awesome. Kanban, this is a little different. It's kind of, think of your to-do list with to do, in progress, and done. Whereas a sprint board might have more columns. It might have to do, in progress, in review, blocked, ready for staging, and then in production or something like that. You can have the columns be whatever you like, but in Kanban, it's typically less columns. It's a really simple way to work. And Kanban's really good if you have a defined set of work. You need to complete these, say, 25 tasks to be done. And people pull from a list of to-do items, and they figure out how much work they can take on. You set a work in progress limit so that you don't have everything in there at like 90% done. But the Kanban, you can really kind of trust the team to figure out what's most important to grab. Super simple and autonomous. Like I said, clear start and end. That's really where Kanban works well. And I kind of think Kanban works well if you're not super dependent on other teams. It's just really straightforward projects. And just a note on customizing columns and statuses in either case. Maybe your project is an editorial project and you want to know where things are along the way, and draft, editing, finalized, maybe a final copy review, and then finished. You can have statuses that represent those parts of the project. You don't need to stick with the software development, to do, in progress, in review. So you're definitely given free rein to make the tool work for you. Um, let's say you're planning a vacation. Well, you know exactly what you need to do. You only have one suitcase. You only have so many bathing suits. You know what you need to pack. You could have a Kanban board for that. Maybe I've done that in the past. If you're studying for something, like when I was studying for my PMP, I had a Kanban board on my wall with sticky notes. And once I was finished studying one chapter, I'd move the sticky note over, and it really helped me stay organized. So if you have an example of a project you're working on and you need advice of if you should use Scrum or Kanban, let's talk about it at the end of the session. So the next thing to get on the same page about, and I see a couple questions come in, I'll loop back on those at the end, I promise. The next thing to get aligned about is, how are you using the parts of the system? How are you using the hierarchy? This is just an example of Jira. I know all those project management tools have different issue types or different hierarchies or different tasks. It's really important that you think on which parts of the tool you'd like to use and what it means for your project. So you might look at this list and say, yeah, I know what all these are. I know what a task is. I know what a story is. I know what a bug, epic. Those all make perfect sense to me. We used them at my old company. Well, everybody else in the room did the same. And everybody else in the room worked somewhere else before here. So people have different understandings of what these items mean. And it's really important you get on the same page about what they mean for you in this moment, for this project. Just make sure you're speaking the same language. And it's great to speak the same language about the project and then about the tool, because then you're all starting from the same place. And when things go awry, it's easier to get to the root cause. So you're not talking about semantics and, well, I thought that was a story and it's a task, and people can get hung up on the details. So I think of tasks or stories as something that can be done in a sprint. Epics are things that take more than a few sprints or a couple weeks, maybe 3, maybe 4. Initiatives, maybe a quarter long example of a project. And then themes are overarching themes that last a good part of the year. Initiative and themes, you can decide what those mean for you. This is just an example, so think on what you want to use. The biggest gotcha that I'll throw out there is something you probably have seen, where something comes in and it's let's say you have a button on your website and it says learn more, and you get a bug that comes in the backlog and it says button on website says learn more, it should say try now, and it comes in as a bug. It's up to you to know that's a feature request, that's not a bug. The website's working as designed. When you click, something happens. If you were to click there and maybe you weren't taken to a form fill or nothing happened, yeah, that would be a bug. But be really clear about what's a feature request and what's a bug. And if those come in, then it's just important to have a conversation with the person who logged the ticket and say, hey, thanks for the feedback. We agree, we're going to change this to a story or task and get it done. Bugs are just, everybody, if there's a bug, everybody draws their attention to it because they don't want anything broken or not behaving as expected. So just keep that in mind, that happens. And the reason it's important to think about all this stuff before you dig in is because it's the language you're going to use, and it's how you're going to break work down into the smallest possible chunk. There's one question that just came in that I'll address now. Why do you feel is an overlooked reason why team communication can break down? As a Scrum Master, how would you ensure the team does not fall into that trap? I think this is relating to just an overlooked reason why there can be a breakdown of communication is because people, I don't know, we're all busy. We all have maybe jobs to do in addition to a project. And so if you're spending time getting on the same page about just how you're organized and what the parts of the project are and what each milestone means. You're just kind of burning daylight. And as a Scrum Master, to ensure that the team does not fall into that trap, it's just setting your team up for success, talking about this at the start of the project. And people are going to look at you like, hey, we don't need to be going over this stuff, but just say, humor me, everyone. Just give me 10 minutes and let's talk through this. Here's your resources. And then also make sure your door's open so that if people have questions, they feel comfortable coming to you. Things will happen. Just be approachable. And I think that's the biggest thing you can do as a Scrum Master to make sure your team doesn't fall into any miscommunication traps. And then, when people do ask you questions about, hey, I logged an epic and I don't know if it was the right thing to do. Can we talk through it? Use that as much as I hate to say it, like a teaching moment, a learning moment. Use that as a way to teach the rest of the team. Hey, so-and-so had a really great question, and you don't have to call them out. You can say a question came in about, should this be an epic or a story? Let's talk about it. What do you all think? And you can get to that conclusion together, but just make sure you're working as a team, as a unit on all these things, and really communicate more than you think you need to, because you all know people need to hear something about 7 times before it really sinks in. So on that note, on the communication front, it's really important you communicate and make sure the team knows we're using Sprint, we're using Kanban. You can build a dashboard to make sure that people have all the right project info in one place. Maybe you want a news feed so that people don't have to pay attention to emails. You can have on that dashboard a filter that shows tickets closed today or tickets created today. You can use things like Jira Roadmap, or you can use Gantt charts. You can use all kinds of different tools to make sure that your team is aligned. Figure out what metrics matter to the project team and just make it really easy for them to find it. If you do this, if you have everything in one spot, it just makes it so much easier. So there's 2 different groups here, right? There's your project team and there's external stakeholders. The project team, they care about the nitty-gritty. Your external stakeholders, I don't think they really care about the number of issues done, but they might care about what epics were completed or what milestones were completed. How far along are we overall? What's the % complete? Are there any blockers? If I was you, I would build a dashboard for each of these groups, one for the internal project team with the nitty gritty, and then one for the external stakeholder group with just high level things. Because if you're working with the C-suite, they don't only have so much attention, and you want to make it really easy for them to understand your project and if it's on or off track. Let's talk about those status calls. Every project manager, every Scrum Master has the project calls, weekly status calls. How are things going? Does anyone need help? Well, let me tell you something. You don't need to have that status call if everything's on track. I know that sounds crazy, but if you have tools that are telling you if things are on track, great. Trust that. Talk to your team, make sure it's accurate, but use that time you have together to talk about the anomalies. Is something going faster than expected, or something taking too long? Does anybody need help? Is there a blocker? If you spend time talking, using meeting time for things like that, rather than, is it on track? Yes, good, moving on. I think people will attend your meetings more often, and they'll make sure that they're attentive, because they'll usually be not quite as long as the other ones. So talk about the anomalies. And then the other thing to consider is exception reports. Now, this isn't something you'll find in your Jira menu. It's not a list that like build exception report Jira. It won't do it for you. You have to think about an exception is, okay, I want Jira to show me when something is not right. For example, cycle time is something that people often measure in software projects. How long does it take for something to come from the backlog to the board to done? Maybe we want less than a month cycle time. So an exception report in this example would be, show me tickets that are beyond 1 month cycle time. Those exception reports will really help you gauge the health of the project and get those warning signs. And you can use this with it doesn't have to be software development. When I was in sales ops, we had something called the wall of shame, and it was to show if people hadn't logged into Salesforce. And I know that sounds mean. It was all in good fun. So we all thought it was funny, and I wasn't trying to be mean or anything like that. But if somebody hadn't logged into Salesforce in a week, their name showed up on the wall of shame. If somebody had a deal and commit, but they didn't have competitor details on the deal, their name showed up on the wall of shame. So I don't know, sometimes making it known what people are up to will sort of drive behavior, but just be careful with that. Make sure you're doing that with a team you trust, and that you don't want to come across too harsh. I worked with the Northeast team at that point, so they had pretty thick skins and took it all really well. So exception reports can be for you or for the project team, but they're a great way to know when something's off track. Now, when you're working on all of this, consistency is key. If you get in the habit of maybe delivering asynchronous updates about the project, hey, here's what we did this week, here's what we have next week, here's any blockers, just find that rhythm, get used to doing that, and be consistent with it. Because people will appreciate your consistency, and it sort of puts their mind at ease. And remember how we talked about the shared drive or confluence space or teams, spot in teams to save things. Just be consistent with your naming conventions too, because then when you're saving things, people will know exactly what you're talking about. And the more systems you can create where people can pull information as they desire rather than rely on you to push it out, the better. Take manual out of all of this. I mean, if you're working in a startup, you're likely working in some sort of tech. There's some element of tech involved. We have all these tools, make them work for you. And just be super consistent. Be consistent about how you're communicating, and talk about the anomalies. So, I hate to say it, build in buffers, because I'll use the word stuff happens. It always does. I think the best way to make the powers that be laugh is to come up with a plan, right? You've spent all this time, I told you, spent an afternoon getting organized, and the project goes off track. Something happens where things don't match your beautiful, beautiful plan. It's okay. It's totally okay. This is going to happen. Just know it. So build in buffers so that you can take it in stride and say, hey, okay, it's all right. We'll get back on track. Here's what we're going to do. As a project manager or scrum master, people don't report to you, and you want to be somebody that they want to work with. So if you're flexible and accommodating, and you kind of see the bigger picture, you think ahead, they'll want to work with you more, and they'll finish the tasks assigned to them on time. It's kind of this song and dance that you do as a project manager, because nobody really has to do what you're asking. You're asking, right? You're not telling. So you're a trust builder, a liaison, a town crier, a facilitator. Just be kind in all of those roles so that people trust you. And, bad news delivered fast is a great thing. Be approachable. Let people know, I'm going to help you get back on track. And it's okay if things go off track. We just need to know about it. And also encourage your team. It's okay to share work in progress, and it's okay to ask for help. We're all in this together. So let's see, we're through the project, right? So it's done. We can cross the finish line. Um, before you before you really cross the finish line, get some numbers together. You spent all this time putting information into a system. See what you can glean from the tool. Did things sit in a status for too long? Maybe that's something to call out. Did things take as long or longer than expected? That's something to know. Was a story in more than one sprint? What did a burn down chart look like throughout the project? How much cycle time did it take to work something? These are great ways to give you an indication of overall project health and what to change or do different next time. So before you call it a day, grab some of those numbers. And then most importantly, host a retrospective. We can talk about all the different ceremonies that you can have after this if anyone is interested. But I think retrospectives are the most important. You can use the data that you found, sort of give that to the team and say, hey, here's what we have. And then you can talk about it. Or you can say those numbers for after the retro and say, okay, I want to get everybody's thoughts and then look at the numbers so you're not influencing people and you're getting their true, honest opinion. Retros are an incredibly safe space if they're conducted well. And you can get to the root cause of what happened during a project. You can figure out lessons learned and help your future projects. It's so important to pause here and just take this moment to really reflect before people move on to the next. And if you as a project manager made a mistake during the project, don't be afraid to laugh it off and move on. You can put your things in the retro. I think during the next project, I should be better about. If you show your vulnerability and humility instead of your ego, you might find that other people will do the same. So I read something recently that said people aren't afraid of hard conversations, but they're afraid of starting them. So you as the project manager, maybe be the one to start those hard conversations and see what happens. And another thing, make sure you dig into the good stuff. It's not all about what you would change. If you did something well, it's worth noting and documenting so you can look back and remember why it went so well. What did we do? Did we have a review process where when you submit a PR, you also review a PR and that helped move things along? Just jot down the good too. Retros aren't about only the bad stuff. And then most importantly, you got to celebrate. When your project is done, get everybody together to celebrate. Have a game night, pizza party, happy hour, coffee together, something to just celebrate that we did this. Your brain releases dopamine after you accomplish something, and it gives you a lot of satisfaction and happiness. So it's really important for team morale to celebrate success after a project before picking up the next big thing. If you don't give them a moment to celebrate, then people get burnt out because they just feel so overwhelmed and overrun by this next thing. We just finished that. Like, just give people some time. It's a-okay. And let's see, I think we might be out of time here. But in case it's still recording, I'll just say thank you. And let's see, you all can reach me on Discord, and just remember communication, consistency, and celebrations are key. So make the most use of people's time and don't be a bottleneck. Build exception reports, talk about anomalies rather than on-track statuses, and make tools work for you. And celebrate. You all can find me on LinkedIn and in Discord. So I look forward to talking to you all there. Thank you.